Hey. So I've been doing a lot of wet weather riding lately, and the pads are making an awful screeching noise when I'm braking. Is there a way that I can make them more quiet? Well, there's quite a few things that can cause the brakes to squeal. First of all, did you brake in the brakes properly? No, I didn't really brake them in properly. Is that important? Yeah, it's actually really important. You really want to make sure that you get your brakes broken in properly before you go out on your next big ride. For a step-by-step instruction on how to brake in your brakes properly, check out our brake setup video that's on the blog. Otherwise, you have a couple different combinations of brake pads you can use. You've got the centered pads, which tend to work really well in the wet conditions, but also make more noise. They tend to last a bit longer than organic pads though, so that's a plus. On the organic side of things, they are quieter, they grab and they work a little bit better in dry conditions, but they tend to wear a little bit faster because they're softer. For identification purposes, these pads with the kind of copper gold colored backplate, these are Avid's stock centered pads. The pads with the black backplate are Avid's organic pads. The Volagi ship with an organic pad set on the front and a centered pad set on the rear. If you'd like, you can change out the rear to organic too, so you have a full organic set to make it as quiet as possible. You also want to keep any sort of oily substances away from your pads and rotors, such as chain lube, grease, anything of the sort. If you get them on the rotor and the pads, there's a good chance that you'll have to replace the pads. The rotors can be cleaned with a very clean rag and rubbing alcohol or a brake degreaser such as Finish Line Speed Clean. You can try cleaning the pads, but most often it doesn't do any good. If you've gotten any sort of oily residue on the pads themselves, you're probably going to have to replace the pads. And if you do, don't forget the brake-in procedure. If you feel that your brakes are dirty or contaminated at all, and you need to take out the pads to check or clean them, it's pretty easy to do. Simply drop the wheel out of the frame. And the easiest way is probably use a pair of needle nose pliers. Grab the pad at the tab that extends out the bottom of the brake. Remove. Do the same for the other one. And then remember that there's a little brake spring in there. You can use your needle nose pliers to grab that and pull it out. Save this, you'll need it. And then you can check out and inspect your brake pads. Cleaning of the pads and rotor can be done fairly simply if you feel they've been contaminated or exceptionally dirty. You want to avoid doing this if your brakes are quiet and working properly, but if they're giving you a little bit of grief, making a little bit of noise, you can go ahead and clean them with the following steps. You can use either rubbing alcohol or a degreaser such as Finish Line Speed Degreaser. A very clean, high quality rag. Pour a little bit of alcohol on the rag and then just wipe the residue off the brake pad. You can see it got really dark in the center there, and now it's starting to dissipate. Surface of the pad is much cleaner now. You can go ahead and do the same thing with the other brake pad. Again, wipe it till it becomes clean. That's pretty much it. Cleaning the rotor is also fairly easy. Kind of the same idea, alcohol and clean rag. Then gently wipe the surface of the rotor on both sides. Try not to get too much of your rag residue on the rotor. Takes off a little bit of the dirt. That's it. To reinstall your brake pads, you want to make a little sandwich with the two pads with the spring in the center. Now the pad with the kink tab on the bottom is the inboard pad, while the pad with the flat tab is the outboard pad. Start by putting the spring so that the notch is in between the two tabs on the brake pad, and then take your inboard pad and do the same thing. The tabs in the center, and then go ahead, simply insert into the caliper and push into place. You can use a screwdriver, a pair of pliers, whatever. Just simply press on the metal part of the tab until you hear a click. Both pads pop right into the brake, and that's it. Following all these steps closely should add up to a brake that's quiet in most conditions. In really wet, cold, rainy environments, most likely the brakes are always going to make a peep just when you first grab the brakes after not using them for a while. And what happens is the rotor itself cools down and it needs to warm up to the temperature that it operates properly at. Don't worry though, even if your brakes are making a noise for a second, they're still slowing you down. Here you are, enjoy. Alright, cool, I'll try that, thanks.